To understand keyword parameters, remember two things that we've said before. First, remember that we said Python assumes that arguments come in the order that parameters are defined in a function definition. Second, remember that at one point, we included a weird extra bit of code in our print statement. I said at the time, it prevents Python from either adding a space or breaking down to a new line at the end of whatever it's printing. I promised at the time to come back to this later, and now is later. So for required parameters, what we've said so far is true with regard to assuming arguments come in the order that parameters are defined. However, sometimes that can be a bit limiting. One instance of that is that oftentimes we might have parameters for which we want to assume one value, but allow the program to override this if they want. The print function shown here is a good example of this. The print function takes as input one or more strings, and it prints them in order. So here on line 1, Python is told to print the strings A, B, and C. What does the output look like? We see the letters A, B, and C, but we see spaces in between them. Line 2 says to print D, E, and F, and sure enough it does, again separated by spaces, and on a new line from the previous print statement. We'll discuss this more later, but technically, new line itself is a character that tells the computer to stop printing on the current line and print the next text on the next line. So what we see here is the computer making two assumptions. First, it assumes if we have multiple strings in one print statement, that we want to put spaces in between them when printing them. And second, that we want to conclude each print statement with a new line character, breaking up the lines and starting the next print statement on the next line. So far, those have been pretty good assumptions. In fact, we rely on that second assumption to make our output window make sense. Otherwise, it would just be all the lines that we printed out all crammed together. However, sometimes we might not want that. Before, for example, if we were printing a currency symbol next to a number, we wouldn't want a space or a line break in between that symbol and that number. How can we override Python's assumption? Well, the way we do this is with what are called keyword parameters. Here we've modified our code to take advantage of two different keyword parameters, sep and end. Sep is a keyword that tells Python what character or what string to use to separate individual strings in one print statement. End is a keyword parameter that tells Python what character to put at the end of the print statement. Usually it puts a new line character. Here, we've overridden both and said to use an empty string as both our separator and as what we put at the end of any print statement. The result is that when Python runs line 1, it still prints ABC, but there are no spaces between A and B and between B and C. And there's no new line character at the end. So when it runs line 2, it prints the next set of output to the same line. D comes right after C, and again, there are no spaces before E or before F. So a keyword parameter is a parameter that has an assumed value, but the program or the function call can override that assumed value. Python's assumed value for the keyword parameter called sep is space, but here we've overridden it with an empty string that prevents it from putting anything between those characters. We pass keyword parameters into the function call the same way we pass regular parameters or regular arguments. We separate them by commas. Python knows that every comma separates a pair of arguments. What makes it distinct is that we actually specify the variable name and use the assignment operator to set it equal to a different value. Recall that we said before that passing arguments into functions is kind of like just using an assignment statement as the first line of the function call. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're creating a new assignment statement, something like sep equals an empty string, and that is called at the very beginning of the function call. The difference here is that if we don't set the value of sep or end or any other keyword parameter, then the computer already has a value in place for them, so it can keep running. It's not like our problem with our currency amount function, where if we didn't supply one of the arguments, the computer would crash. Instead, there already is a value for these parameters, but we can change it if we want to. We have to use the variable names though, because Python can't assume anything based on the order of these parameters. We're allowed to skip some, and so it doesn't automatically know what parameter we're trying to modify unless we actually specify the name. The fact that we're using empty values for this might make this a little bit confusing, so let's try it one more time with more visible characters. On line 1, we tell the computer to print 3 different strings, A, B, and C. It knows how to take multiple values for the print function that are just meant to be printed. Then we modify the keyword parameter sep and set it equal to the pound sign. That says between each pair of things printed, put a pound sign or a hash mark. And similarly, we also change the end character. That says end this line with a question mark. End is a variable that holds the string that should be put at the end of each print statement, and sep is a variable that holds the value that should be printed between each pair of arguments to the print function. So what do we see when this runs? Well, it prints the first thing, A, and then it prints the separator character, which we set to be the pound sign. Then it prints B, the second argument, and then again it prints the pound sign, our separator character. Then it prints C, our third argument, and because there are no more arguments to print, it then prints our end character, a question mark. So we've replaced the spaces with pound signs, and the new line character with a question mark. Line 2 does something kind of similar and kind of different. It starts by printing D, the first argument, then it prints its own separator character. For this call to print, that's the percent sign. So it prints D and then the percent sign, then the second argument, E, then the percent sign again, separator character, then the third argument, F, and then again, because there are no more arguments to print, it prints the end character, which is now an exclamation point. So the important thing here is that there are parameters to this print function that we don't have to give arguments when we call print, but we can. They're optional parameters. And because they're optional, we have to actually state their name when we want to use them, instead of just assuming that the computer can infer what we're doing based on the order of the arguments we pass in.